Summer routines live or die by how easy they are, and honestly, if something takes too much effort, I'm out. That's why Groons is my go-to. It's my one daily pack of gummies covering my greens, vitamins, and minerals. Plus, it has 6 grams of prebiotic fiber, which is more than 2 cups of broccoli. No mixing powders, no giant pills, no hassle. I just rip open the pack and I'm done. They taste good and they make it easy to stay on top of my health, even when life gets busy. Save up to 52% with the code PODCAST at Groons.co. That's code PODCAST at GRUNS.co.
This is the Russo Hockey Show. Welcome back. As you can notice, I'm doing it solo today. No Jim Suhan. You will be seeing actually in the next little while some changes that we're going to be making to this show that we think that you're going to like. Jim will still be on here. Anthony Lepanto will be on here. And every once in a while, like today, I'm going to be inviting one of my friends, somebody that you all know in hockey, whether that be a coach, a player, or in today's case, one of the great broadcasters in NHL history, Gord Miller. He's from TSN. You've seen him all the time doing the Eastern Bubble games on NBC. You've seen him in World Championships, World Juniors. He's just absolutely one of the great voices, play-by-play voices, so well connected. Anytime he comes down to XL Energy Center, no matter who the coach is, who the GM is, it's like right when Gord Miller shows up, it's like the world stops and that coach or GM starts talking to him, and he's just developed those type of close personal relationships. So really excited about today's show that is, of course, as always, brought to you by Profile by Sanford, the Twill in the Galleria Mall, State Farm with Tody Hoagland, and Bosch Law. So this is Michael Russo on the Russo Hockey Show, and without further ado, here is Gord Miller. As promised, one of the preeminent voices in all of hockey. If you are north of the border or lucky enough to have the NHL package, you recognize him from TSN. If you're in the States, you'll recognize him from many, many years doing games in the World Junior Championships, the World Championships. Obviously, NBC, you saw him in the Eastern Conference bubble doing the qualifying round and the first round of the Stanley Cup Playoffs. Gord Miller, how are you?
I'm very well, Mike. How are you doing?
Very, very good. Man, what was it like being in that bubble? Because I had Kenny Albert on a podcast of mine last week, and I've did a lot of stories on the Western bubble because that's where Minnesota was for a couple of weeks. But the Eastern bubble, I have not written a lot about.
It was interesting. It was certainly a different experience. They ran it really well, Mike. They did a really good job of organizing it. It was really seamless, and I give them a ton of credit for that. And nothing they can do about it. It's just a long time to be in there. And I was only in for 3 weeks. But I think, you heard Rick Bowness in Dallas make the comments about, people don't appreciate how difficult it is. I'm not asking anyone to feel sorry for NHL players, but I think you can empathize with people who, Lars Eller's wife had a baby while he was in there. He left and came back. I was talking to Thomas Hickey of the Islanders. His brother died of brain cancer a few months ago. He can't be with his family. I think it is difficult with school, people going back to school and all that goes with it. It's very tough to be away from your families at this time. And I think right almost from the outset, the hockey was really intense. In one of the first games that Carolina played against the Rangers, one of the first games that was played, really hard hitting, really intense. And I think the players are very much into it.
Yeah, I mean, you saw that. It was an unbelievable hit that all of a sudden, the next thing you know, Carolina goes and scores a couple goals.
Yeah,
and it really kind of, I think, even with a lot of teams that were watching that qualifying round, it kind of woke them up that wow, this is actually the playoffs.
And I think you go from 0 to 100, right? You go from a training camp right into the elimination playoffs for those teams that were playing in those. So you had Brady Shea, hitting Jesper Fast of the Rangers. So, yeah, I think it was a really intriguing experience. I hope it's once in a lifetime. It was very different having the officials in the same hotel with us. At the start of every season, the teams submit their hotel lists to the league, and so the league makes sure the officials never stay in the same hotel as a team. And but here in the bubble, you had the officials staying there. So, for example, John Tortorella really disliked the too many men call against his team. He was going nuts on the bench. But that night, coming back, ran into the officiating crew, and they actually talked it out very
Wow.
calmly and talked it out. I saw players, who had penalties called against them they didn't like, talking to the officials later about what had happened, and I think it actually humanizes the officials because for the most part, the players only see the officials at the rink. You never see them away from the rink.
Yeah. What is what now? Like Edmonton, I could totally envision, even though I wasn't in the bubble, because I've been to all those hotels. What
Mm-hmm.
was it like staying at the Royal York? Because the way I envision the Royal York is that if you're in that hotel, you're in that hotel where they've created this gigantic bubble at the Hotel X in Toronto. They created this, whole essentially walled off community in Edmonton. What was it like having so many teams, the NHL staff, broadcasters, and the officials at the Royal York?
So there's seven of us. There were seven teams at the Royal York, and then five other teams were at Hotel X, which is about a 10-minute drive away. So for those at Hotel X, they have to take a bus over every time they go to the rink. For me, I could walk to the arena. It's only a block. It actually winds up being well. You can picture for listeners in Minnesota, you can picture the St. Paul Hotel over to XL Energy Center. That's about the distance. The difference is the walk is about 4 blocks because you got to wind your way through the corridor that they set aside exclusively for us, so that we wouldn't interact with anyone from the public. So it was really well done that way.
We're talking with Gord Miller, and you can follow him on Twitter, by the way, at GMillerTSN. This is the Russo Hockey Show. Gord, you did the second longest overtime of the modern era
Mm-hmm.
between the Columbus Blue Jackets and the Carolina Hurricanes, right? No. What am I
No,
getting?
Columbus and Tampa.
Tampa, there you go. And, what was really fascinating about that is the person that was between the pipes for the Philadelphia Flyers during the longest game
Yeah.
of the modern era, Brian Boucher, was between the glass, who I absolutely love the color that he does. But, I mean, what is a game like that like to call?
Well, I think you have to be cognizant of the fact that the big moment could come at any time. You don't know when you're doing it that it's going to be 5 overtimes long. Right? So, I mean, the winning goal could come the second, the third, the fourth. It could come at any moment. And I have done some baseball in my career. And one of the things learned early on is the next pitch is probably nothing, but could be everything. And I remember doing a Toronto Blue Jay game early in my career at TSN and flubbing a home run call early in the game, a solo home run call. Well, it turned out to be the only run in a 1-0 game. So you kind of want to make sure when the overtime moment comes that you get it right. Now you hope for a clean goal. You hope it's not a scramble or a weird deflection or something like that, but you want to call it clean. And I mean, you do get to the point sometimes in those games, and I called the Peter Sikora, the Anaheim Dallas 5 overtime game ended by Peter Sikora. I called that one too. And there was a point in that game where you thought they might never score. They're so tired. But it is, I think, one of the great features of hockey. I think is the overtime. I think it's the best overtime of the major sports, and the winning moment can come at any time.
How hard is it also doing these games? Now, maybe you get used to it because you always have, whether it's Ray Ferraro between the glass or in this case, Brian Boucher. But there are times where you're also working games with a color analyst that's working remotely back in the studio in this weird time that we're in. How difficult is that? Like, I was watching a game yesterday where Eddie Olchuk literally said on the air, "Hey, Kenny," because he wanted to get a point in.
Yeah, I didn't find it that bad, actually. I've worked with all those analysts before. I did a game with Eddie Olczyk doing remote commentary. I think two of them, actually. I did some games with AJ Malesko, and I've worked with her before. So, no, I after a while, I didn't even notice it, to be honest. Anson Carter, who I've worked with before. So I didn't really notice it at all. I think it's very hard to call a game off the monitor live because you can't, first of all, you can't see the trail official.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden the whistle goes and you're not sure why it went. You also aren't cognizant of line changes as much, right? When you're calling the game off a remote feed because you don't see the change. So you may not see an odd man rush develop as quickly, or a guy jump into the play, or a guy, especially a defense, when the defense changes and the puck's in the offensive zone, all of a sudden a defenseman jumps into the screen fresh and you didn't see him come on. So I think that makes it harder to do play-by-play of a game remotely.
I mentioned your longtime partner, Ray Ferraro. He's one of my favorite people. Whenever I need a great quote from somebody in the game, I usually call up Razor. He's one of the most intelligent people, and he's got this great way of just explaining things. The not being able to do the World Juniors with him had to be probably your biggest disappointment during the pandemic.
No, we did the junior. We did the juniors together. We did the juniors together. Yeah, we were in. We were on site. The pandemic didn't break out until we didn't do the World Championship together. But we did the World Junior together in the Czech Republic, and it turned out to be one of the greatest gold medal games ever played. Canada came with the late comeback against the Russians. We didn't do the World Championship together, and we're not doing the playoffs together. So last year we did the playoffs together, which was great. Traveled every day, and you kind of take that for granted, when you're doing it. And now I miss the traveling with Ray and doing those games. So I don't know what this year's World Junior is going to look like. In Edmonton, I think it might be in a bubble. So we'll have to see. I mean, that's still a few months off.
And the World Championships, I mean, was that disappointing not getting to be part of that this year?
It was. For me personally, I've got some family ties to Switzerland. We were going to be in Lausanne and Zurich, and I was looking forward to taking my daughter there to meet some cousins. My grandfather on my mom's side came over from Switzerland in the early part of the last century, and so I was kind of looking forward to that, and that is disappointing. The World Championship is a great event. It's a chance to see a lot of players you wouldn't normally see. I've always had a chance to see Kirill Kaprizov at it, and others, and so it's a great event. It's a terrific event to do, and I missed not doing it.
Yeah, you mentioned Kaprizov. What do you find will be his biggest adjustment to the NHL? Because I think, as you could imagine, Wild fans have waited so long for him.
Right. Yeah, I think
they are going to expect him to be a Calder Trophy candidate right off the hop.
Well, I think there's a couple of things. You think back to Vegas getting Vadim Shipachev. Remember they brought him over? Now, Shipachev was older. I think he was 29 maybe when he came over. I would say this, and I wouldn't want to tell Minnesota Wild how to do their business, but I think you need another Russian.
Mm-hmm.
I think one of the smartest things the Pittsburgh Penguins ever did was to bring in Yuri Hrdina to play with Jaromir Jagr. An older Czech that he could speak the language with. And do the Wild have any Russian players or prospects? I don't believe they do they?
No, I mean they have Alex Hovanov in the
right, but he's a young guy. Hovanov's a good player, by the way.
Yep, and he's going to play next season in the KHL, and the only option might be re-signing Galchenyuk. Right.
So I would say that my advice would be to any team that brings in a young player from Europe, especially and Russia, especially, they don't speak the language. They don't know the culture, and the game's very different. And Evgeny Kuznetsov wrote a great piece a couple of years ago, or narrated a great piece about the differences between Russian hockey and North America hockey. Russian hockey is about regroup, puck possession. It's a very abstract game, east-west. The NHL is a very linear game. Move it forward, get it in. And so that's a difficult adjustment, but I also think it's a very tough adjustment culturally. And for someone who's never been in North America for any length of time, who doesn't really speak the language, I think Kaprizov would be well served if the Wild had a veteran Russian player for him to be with and to learn from.
Having seen him play a lot, what type of player do you see him being in the NHL?
Ultra creative, like an Artemi Panarin with a little more burst, a little more skating burst than Panarin has. Panarin's just so good at changing speeds and altering the rhythm of a game, but Kaprizov is a terrific offensive talent, very elusive, maybe more of a pure goal scorer than Panarin is, but he's a very, very good player. Let's not forget, again, Panarin has played with other Russians before, and so has that comfort level. I really think it's important to remember how big a jump this is culturally for a player. And I'm a big soccer fan, Mike, and I remember for years in England they said that Brazilian players couldn't play in England. They just they couldn't grasp the way it was played. Well, you've got a 23-year-old kid who speaks Portuguese living in Liverpool. How do you expect him to integrate? You've got to, and so gradually these teams got whether you want to call it a concierge or they got people on staff to help these players get an apartment, find a doctor, go to a restaurant, all these things. Imagine, Mike, for your listeners, imagine being dropped in the middle of Russia. So now you're in Magnitogorsk, Russia, and you're trying to navigate your way around and find a place to live and all these things. It's very difficult.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. I can't even imagine. I'd say that to all the European players in general that I cover all the time. I just don't think that the average fan just could really appreciate what it would be like to just take any nationality and come here, but especially from Russia. We're talking with Gord Miller from TSN and NBC. Want to ask you a couple more questions, and I also have a ton of Twitter questions, but a couple more questions on the actual playoffs going on right now. Hey, this is Michael Russo again on the Russo Hockey Show, and if you know me, you know my weight fluctuates, especially during hockey season. It especially fluctuated during the quarantine, fluctuated upwards. And I continue those bad habits that I started during the hockey season, during the quarantine. While I got in touch with the Profile by Sanford, started right away. The program's developed by doctors. It takes the guesswork out of weight loss. I've already crossed the 40-pound mark and know I can keep it going. It's been actually an awesome week. I think I had said it on last week's show. 1 week I'll be steady. That next week I have a big loss. That's one of this week. So that's always a very fun thing when you get on the scale and you actually see the work being shown in numbers. One big reason is you get the personal coaching. I talk to Danette on a weekly basis. I go over my challenges I see for the upcoming week, and away I go. I follow their activities app. Their food is delicious, and I feel constant support. So what are you waiting for? There's 6 locations in the Twin Cities. There's locations all over the country. There's locations outside of the Twin Cities as well in Minnesota. So for more information, go to profileplan.com and tell them that Russo sent you. Again, profileplan.com. The New York Islanders fascinate me. They were actually my dark horse going into the playoffs just because they were in such a funk going into the pandemic that I just thought that if any team was going to be aided by the break, it would be the Islanders. But we saw them against the Capitals just suck the life out of these guys. I'm not positive. You were there in the bubble. I'm not positive how much the Caps actually wanted to be there. They certainly didn't seem to want to put up quite a fight in this round.
Well, I mean, I would say this, though. They got down 3-0 in one game 4. So there did seem to be that. The Islanders are an interesting group because, I think Adam Pelech had the Achilles injury, before the break. So they'd lost some key players to injury. And obviously the break allowed them to get back. They have, kind of I don't want to say a no-name defense, but certainly an underrated defense. They don't have a true number one. They don't have a Ryan Suter. They don't have a guy that plays 25 minutes a night that you point to that plays in the power play, kills penalties, all of that. They don't have that guy. What they have is probably 4 or 5 number 2 defensemen, and they roll 4 lines that are very good. The Islanders have an identity, and I think that this is the best example of a team where the general manager, in this case Lou Lamoriello, and the coach Barry Trotz have virtually identical ideas of how they want a team to play, the kind of players they want, and how to utilize them. This is exactly the kind of team that Lou Lamoriello likes, and it's the exact kind of team that Barry Trotz wants to coach. And so when you have that, it really helps the group out because everyone understands where they fit. There's no ambiguity about it. It's not like the general manager signed this star player and the coach doesn't want to use him.
Yeah.
Or the team drafted a young guy and the coach doesn't want to play him. Or the coach really likes a player but management doesn't want him playing so much. Those 2 guys are on the same page about virtually everything. And so that's how you get a Leo Komarov in the lineup for the Islanders when he might not play somewhere else. Or the Cizikas Martin Clutterbuck line, which is it's been worn out, but probably the best 4th line in the game. Like Barry Trotz has no hesitancy whatsoever to put those guys out against another team's top line in a tight game late in the 3rd period. None whatsoever.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I mean, you think about probably the 4 biggest front runners coming into the playoffs were Boston, Tampa Bay, Colorado, and Vegas. All 4 are still alive. Colorado obviously had their first blip yesterday, but Vegas rolls over the Canucks. Bruins Lightning that was a great game. Bruins wind up edging them. If you had a guess right now, who do you see at the end of the day being still standing?
Well, Vegas and Philly are the 2 best teams I've seen so far. I think the one thing that the bubble shows is the difference between this and a regular playoff series where you change venues. So let's take, for example, like the Philadelphia-Montreal series in the last round, where Montreal got the split in the first 2 games. In a normal playoff year, they'd be going home to Montreal for games 3 and 4 with a raucous Bell Center, all that emotion behind them and everything else. In this case, it's the same venue, and the only difference is who gets the last change. So you don't have those wild swings of emotion. And so really the only lower seed upset, I believe, so far has been, there's been two, right? St. Louis, no, St. Louis is the higher seed, sorry. No, Vancouver, yeah. Vancouver beat St. Louis. They were the lower seed, and the Islanders over Washington. But for the most part, a team can steady themselves more readily than they could after, say, in a regular series when you got to go to their city in front of their fans for games 3 and 4. So, but Vegas looks very good to me. I just think Vegas is so deep, so well constructed. Philadelphia is a very good team, and I think part of the thing in Philadelphia is, and Chuck Fletcher, the former GM in Minnesota, would be the first to give credit to these guys. The job that Ron Hextall and Chris Pryor did to lay the foundation there, they drafted and developed so well. I mean, Ivan Provorov is a star.
Yep.
That young defenseman is a star. Carter Hart is a star. You look at the players they drafted and developed, Travis Konechny, the list goes on and on. Just such a good job of drafting and developing. And then Chuck Fletcher went in, signed Kevin Hayes, which was a great signing, made some nice deals to get some depth. So, but Vegas to me, is it's hard to see where the weaknesses are for Vegas. They're big, they're strong, they're fast, they're skilled. I think, trying to compare any expansion team to them is going to be very difficult because of the conditions in which they came in. They made those 9 deals for players, including one with Minnesota, that I don't think we'll see again.
Yeah, no doubt. I think it's going to be a lot harder for Ron Francis in Seattle. Yeah. It is interesting. I mean, you mentioned Vegas there and how deep they are. What I was really interested and fascinated about watching last night's game was how did Robin Lehner react to the drama of the previous couple of days created by Alan Walsh. Walsh did the same thing here in Minnesota when he wasn't happy the way that Peter Sikora and Martin Havlat was being used by Todd Richards. The only difference was it wasn't a Twitter thing, so we didn't have to put a picture of Todd Richards on Twitter. He just called me up and I wrote the story. But Leonard came out yesterday and he wasn't tested a ton, but he gets the great shutout and it seems like everything's now dissipated there.
Well, I think, and we saw the same thing with Alan Walsh in Montreal with Yaroslav Halak and Carey Price early on. I don't think the players care. And I mean, Walsh defends his clients. That's what he does. Yep. You can argue with the way he does it, but that's what he does. And I don't think it would bother Lehner one bit. First of all, Robin Lehner of any goaltender has probably, endured more, publicly and privately than most of us, and is probably, has more resolve to that. So I don't think within the room, I think guys would laugh. Now, if the other guy in net was like, yeah, I should be playing, then that would be an issue. But Marc-Andre Fleury is a pretty good guy, and so it's Alan Walsh's job to stand up for his clients, and if you don't like the way he does it, he's your agent. So.
Yeah, no doubt. We're talking with Gord Miller. Gord, I said in the intro before you were on that the one thing that I've always noticed about you is just how respected you are. Whenever you show up at XL Energy Center, it doesn't matter who the coach is, who the GM is, they come to you right away. You've developed such great relationships in this game. You've developed such a respect level in this game. How did that all start for you? Where not only are you an encyclopedia, but you've got this passion that seems like people in the game gravitate toward.
Just being around a long time, I guess. I covered the game in the 80s in Edmonton, then moved to TSN in 90. I think part of it is, the World Junior Championship, right? You're around those guys during the holidays, and quite often we're staying in the same hotels. And we also see the players in kind of a different light at that age. So, I knew Zach Parise when he was 17, Ryan Suter, Mikko Koivu. I saw all those guys play when they were kids. And you always have that bond with them. And I think, I am immersed in the game. I do love it. I love the sport. I enjoy the people in it. And I am immersed in the game. So I watch it when I'm not working. And I obviously go to a lot of events that people might not otherwise see. I've done the Ivan Halinka tournament, the Summer Under 18 tournament. So I see a lot of players there. So I do have a good rapport with those guys. I might see the players in a different light than they do. And so sometimes they'll say, what kind of guy is that guy? What kind of kid is he? How does he relate to his teammates? You see them behind the scenes. How does that work? And so, yeah, it is interesting. I think I think, hockey is a game where it is a community. I think there is a community of hockey, and I think Tom Curvers can tell you that. Certainly Tom has told me that the number of people who have reached out to him
Yep.
is incredible, and so we saw it with Dale Howardchuk recently too. I think it is a great community, and I think that because the game is so global, we spend a lot of time a long way from home. So in Ostrava at the World Junior, New Year's Eve, you're sitting there with the Tampa Scouts and the Detroit Scouts and all these other guys, and you kind of bond with them there too.
Let's talk a little bit about this upcoming draft, Gord. It's funny, I was just thinking as you were talking. One of the last times I saw you was way back in October. I'm sure I've seen you many times since, but way back in October, it was coming out of the Westin. I think both you and I were on our way. You were waiting for Razor on the way to the rink in Ottawa, and we started just shooting the breeze about this upcoming draft. And you were saying that this might be the year the Wild don't want to do well because remember they were off to a real tough start. And here they at least get into the top 10. But first of all, let me ask you about the very top of the draft. If you were the Wild and you won the lottery, knowing how much the Wild needs centers, would you have ever even considered taking a Lafreniere over a Byfield over a Lafreniere, or is it just guaranteed that Alexis should be the number one this year?
You take Lafreniere. You take Lafreniere. You take him hands down. You don't. I mean, he's just now. Quentin Byfield is a really, really good player. He's going to be a long-time NHL player. I think he's going to be a really good one. Lafreniere has a chance to be a star.
Mm-hmm.
You might be talking Patrick Kane here. You take this. You take the star.
Right.
So
now, sorry.
No hesitation in my mind. You take the star.
So there's answer number one of if the Wild had won, which I'll never get to write about. Now you're in Minnesota. You're number 9.
Right.
This organization. It's funny. I mean, they're still. We don't know if Kakkonen has a chance to be the goalie of the future, but there is going to be a goalie there at Askarov. But the other thing this team has really never had is a true blue chip number 1 center. Is there that where you can get them at number 9, or are guys like Rossi going to be gone by then?
I would think that Marco Rossi would be gone by then. I would think Cole Perfetti would be gone by then. The other question for the Wild, you got to be careful drafting by need because you're drafting 18-year-olds. This isn't the Vikings drafting 22-year-old college seniors, right? You're drafting 18-year-olds. By the time they're going to become the player you want, you don't know what your need might be. But I would say this. I think there's a couple of guys that would be around then that you'd look at. One would be Dylan Holloway, is a terrific young center. A pretty big kid too. Plays at Wisconsin. I think another one would be Dawson Mercer, another center. There's another guy, Hendrix Lapierre, who had a really good Holinka tournament 2 years ago. That's for under 18s. The issue for Lapierre is that he was injured much of this year, and he's slight. He's 179 pounds. But again, you're projecting what the kid's going to be like a few years down the road. Lapierre projects out to be a terrific two-way center with a lot of offensive upside. So, if you're not getting Byfield, who's 6'4", 215, skates like the wind and scores 40 goals in the OHL, and who really wants that? But I do think that there are some intriguing possibilities for the Wild players at 9 for them, and they'll have to think about what they want to do. But I'm with you. I mean, there's lots of teams that have been looking for number 1 centers for a long time, and Montreal's one. Nashville gave up, Seth Jones to get, Ryan Johansson. So you got to be careful, chasing one too hard. But I do think there are some in this draft. You just got to be patient. That's the only problem is you got to be patient.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to Bill Guerin about this just last week. I mean, they just don't, there was Tyler Seguin. Obviously, the ones recently would probably be, and nobody knew at the time how good that Zibanejad trade was going to be. And Ryan O'Reilly, obviously, for just a huge movement for St. Louis. But it is just so hard to acquire a number 1 center that you better draft and develop them.
Well, the other thing, too, is, Mike, that's great. You make the trade for Ryan O'Reilly. You got to have the cap space to do it, too. You got to be able to fit him under your salary structure, and only a few teams can do that, right? So that's the second question, too. So I don't know I'm not sure what direction the Wild are going to go in this summer. It sounds to me like they were close to trading Zach Parise at the deadline. Do they explore that again this summer? First of all, I think before you do anything, what are you? Are you rebuilding? Are you trying to augment a team that you think can compete now? What are you? And so I think the Wild need to, and it's one of the hardest things to do, Mike, is to sit down and really evaluate your team objectively and say, what are we? Not be too critical, but not be too rose-colored glasses either, and say, this is what we are, and here are the steps we need to take to move forward.
How about taking a goalie? What's one is your thought on Askarov, but two, your overall belief and opinion on the age-old question: do you take a goalie at the top of the draft?
Well, at the very top, Luongo is going to be a Hall of Famer. Carey Price went fifth overall. The Askarov looks like a star goaltender. He had a lousy World Junior, but he's got a pretty impressive pedigree. You got to be careful judging 18-year-olds at the World Junior Championship. But I think it's a question mark. If you think he's the guy, then you do it. But I mean, I was talking with a guy from Europe today who was noting that if you take the 10 highest paid goaltenders in the NHL right now, only one of them's in the playoffs, and he's a backup. That's Marc-Andre Fleury.
Yeah.
So look at recent Stanley Cup teams and ask yourself, Jordan Binnington for St. Louis, the year before he was loaned to another organization because the Blues didn't have room for him in their American League, on their American League roster. The year before that, Brayton Holtby didn't start the playoffs for Washington. Right? He was the backup the first two games of the playoffs. Pittsburgh won back-to-back with Matt Murray, who was largely unproven, but the one year they started three different guys. So I think goaltending's important, but I think you don't want to spend too much money on it. And I think the difference between a capable goaltender and a star goaltender isn't that great.
Yeah.
The difference between a capable defenseman and a great defenseman is pretty big. And I think if you're looking for a continuous thread, a common theme through championship teams in the NHL, they have a star defenseman. That's what great teams have. I think you'd have to go back to 2006 in Carolina to find the last Stanley Cup champion that didn't have a Norris Trophy caliber defenseman in their lineup.
Yeah.
Now, having one is no guarantee that you'll win, but I think not having one is pretty much a guarantee that you won't.
Yeah. And that was still a decent, blue line. You had guys like Hedeken and Wesley.
Oh, yeah. They had what the Islanders. They had what the Islanders
Yep.
now. They had four number twos.
Yep. No doubt. And in terms of goaltending, I think Florida's learning that right now. They might not want to blow all your cap space on a $9 million goal.
You spend $10 million on a guy, and he'll never score a goal for you.
Well, and that's what, it's interesting because I did this story that's running probably either later today or tomorrow on goalie options this offseason. And what's interesting is the common denominator on all these really good goalies 3-4 years ago is that it seems like once they get to the late 20s and young 30s, they do seem to break down. And we're seeing that with Dubnyk. We're seeing that with Holtby. It's tough. You all of a sudden commit too much to a goalie financially, and you can wind up in a whole world of hurt.
Exactly, and I think also who are they playing behind is another question too, right? Robin Lehner's been great for Vegas, right? Great. This is his fourth team in 4 years.
Yeah.
Fourth team in 3 years, actually.
Yep.
Right, isn't it? Yeah.
I know he had 3 one-year deals in a row.
He was in Buffalo 3 years ago, right? Then the Islanders, and then Chicago and Vegas this year. So I'm not discounting goaltending because if you don't have it, it's obviously a problem. But a number of championship teams have been able to find goaltending when they need it. It's really hard to find the number one defenseman. It's really hard to find the number one center. They're really hard to come by. There's no question about it. They are much more difficult to come by for me than at least capable goaltending.
Hey everyone, attorney Jerry Bosch here with Bosch Law Firm and WorkCompExperts.com. For almost 30 years, we've represented Minnesotans just like you all over the great state of Minnesota to guarantee they've been treated fairly and with respect when they've suffered a work-related injury. A work injury can change your life in an instant. You need someone on your side who can help you focus on getting back on your feet and getting paid while you do. You may be entitled to medical benefits, wage loss benefits, job placement, retraining, and payment for permanent disability. To make sure you are being paid all the work comp benefits you're entitled to, please call the attorneys at Bosch Law Firm. The call is always free, and there's never a fee unless we recover benefits on your behalf. Call 651-333-8300, Bosch Law Firm, or visit us at WorkCompExperts.com.
Let me go to some Twitter questions for you
Yeah.
here, Gord. Let's go with Go Leafs Go. Wants to know what was it like calling games with no fans in that building, and who do you see as next year's Nick Robertson?
It was different for sure. We did hear the synthetic crowd stuff from. It's actually from the EA Sports library. So if you're a gamer,
Yep.
you've heard that before. But it was different. Once you start calling the game, it's kind of similar. I've done lots of games under those circumstances with not a lot of fans. Maybe at a World Championship where two countries that are not close to the host country are playing, or a World Junior tournament where you do something like that. Once you're calling the game, you just kind of get into it. I would say before we anoint Nick Robertson in Toronto, I would caution that the NHL regular season is a beast, and I think I advise this for fans everywhere to be patient and cautious with new players, and to not just anoint them and then get disappointed when things don't go their way right away.
Right.
It's a hard league, and the 82 games are as much a mental as a physical test. And you will go, I don't care who the player is, you will go through adversity and where you struggle and wonder if you can play at that level. And so I say that next year's Nick Robertson for Toronto should be Nick Robertson.
Yeah. It's funny. Wild Nation has a good question here. He goes, "Do you consider William Nylander a center or a wing?" And this has been a big topic here in Minnesota the last month or so. It just seems like it's so hard to find a center right now that a lot of the guys that players that want that might have been drafted as a center, they wind up a wing like William Nylander in Toronto. Do you think that? We saw that with Mikhail Granlund here. He broke out once he was moved to right wing. Do you see Nylander as a center or a wing?
He can play center. The question is he number one center?
Yeah.
So that remains an open question because he hasn't played it for any length of time. He can clearly play center. He'd have to improve his face-off game a little bit, and the question is his commitment to defense. So Ray Ferraro will tell you, you can make centers into wingers. It's very hard to make wingers into centers.
Yeah.
And so I those would be the open questions about Nylander. Clearly, the offensive game is there, but he does seem more comfortable on the wing than he does at center right now.
A couple questions here from the filter, who's actually Russo's filter. He asks, let's see, other than hockey and Canadian Football League, what event or game would you most like to call?
English soccer. English Premier League soccer.
That's awesome. What's your team, by the way?
Arsenal. I don't want to talk about it.
I'm a Chelsea guy.
Oh, really? Who else do you cheer for? Coca-Cola, McDonald's? Who else do you cheer for? Apple?
Oh man! When I just became a bandwagon. It was like 7 or 8 years ago. They had won the championship, and I went to their first game of the next season against West Brom at Stamford Bridge.
Oh, you went?
And yeah, so it was just it was my first ever English Premier League, so I just became a supporter of Chelsea. But then the next day, I actually saw Man U play Liverpool in Liverpool. Which was
great.
Amazing.
I go over every year. I actually had the London double. I went to an Arsenal game that began at 1:00, and then when it was over, grabbed a taxi and went down to Stamford Bridge and saw Chelsea play at 4. I got there.
Awesome.
I didn't make there for the opening kick, but I was there not long after, so I saw both teams play the same day. It was awesome.
It was quite an experience both days. It was so cool. Also, Filter asked, do Canadians put too much pressure on their World Junior teams? The public's reaction when they lose seems beyond hyperbolic.
I don't think so. Do college fans in the States put too much pressure on their teams? I don't know. I mean, yeah, they're kids. I think they face pressure, playing for their club teams wherever they are. Obviously, they're the very best at that age group, so they're used to facing that pressure. I don't know about that. I mean, the scrutiny is certainly more, but I do think today's NHL player, because of the World Junior Championship and the under-18s and the Holinka tournament, is far better prepared for the scrutiny and pressure that goes with playing at the next level than they might have been 20 years ago.
Right. Daniel Schwartz asks, do you know why the NHL put the conference finals and the finals at the Edmonton bubble instead of Toronto? I assume it's because of the facility in the JW Marriott. That would probably be my biggest guess.
Yeah, and I think also at the time when the cities were named, Northern Alberta, where Edmonton is, had a much lower COVID case rate than Toronto did.
Okay. Makes sense.
I think that was part of it. Because don't forget, too, with the bubble, hundreds of people come and go from the bubble every day. Mm-hmm. Right? Hotel staff, restaurant staff, arena staff, security, they come in and out of the bubble every day. So they have to practice social distancing. They have to wear masks at all times. And so what the COVID rate would be outside the bubble would matter in terms of that's. I mean, ultimately, that's why Vegas wasn't picked. Originally, it was going to be Vegas, I think, in Toronto.
Yep.
But then Vegas had that, Nevada had that spike in cases. So they moved it to Edmonton and Toronto.
Yeah, I know. I was disappointed for many, many reasons. Just mostly because U.S. Writers, most of us couldn't go. Ilan, a couple more questions with Gord Miller, who's been very generous with his time today. Ilan asks about Wild prospect pool. What do you think of guys like Alex Hovenoff, Adam Beckman, Hunter Jones? Not sure. I know you've seen at least a couple of them. I don't know if Beckman's been World Juniors.
Yeah, I've seen Hoffman and Jones. Hovenoff and Jones. Hovenoff looks like a real player. I think, now again, probably now here's the problem. What is this year going to look like for prospects?
Yes.
Right? What's this year going to look like? The Wild's first round pick last year was at Boston College, right? Like, where's are they playing this year? How many games are they playing? You know what I mean? Like this development year is going to be really tough, and that 19/20/21-year-old window is really important for a player's development. So Hovenoff, I think, is playing the KHL. You mentioned, right?
Yep.
They've loaned him to the KHL, so that'll be good for him. I think that Jones is, I think, a bit of a late bloomer, the goaltender. I would say that Kaprizov, I used to call him Kaprizov, is the most interesting of them all, and I think he is a prospect. How he integrates into Minnesota, if he can make an impact right away. I do think what the Wild are missing is a game breaker, the guy who jumps over the boards and can change a game with one shift.
Yeah.
Right. And whether it's a Tyler Seguin in Dallas or a Nathan McKinnon in Colorado, I think Quinn Hughes does that for Vancouver. Just a guy who can jump over the boards and change a game with one shift. Maybe not do anything for the rest of the game, but for that one shift, change the game. Kaprizov could be one of those guys.
Do you think Fiala has that chance? Because I will say I talked to an NHL coach the other day that said that he'd be really hesitant if he was guaranteed to sign him for too long. That he just thinks he has a little Alex Semin in him. But I mean, there's no doubt that this year in the second half he was one of the best players in the league. Yeah,
he was very good. Yeah, I think he does. What you're asking for, and I just talked about a guy who's a lightning strike, but you have to be a lightning strike consistently, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It can't be every 4 games. So Fiala looked very good for Minnesota, and I think it's part of a maturation process. I think he butted heads with coaches a number of times along the way, but Dean Evison seems to have found the right buttons to push. It's really hard to be good every night in the NHL. I've always said this, Mike. I covered the Oilers in the 80s. I think the greatest testament to Wayne Gretzky is the number of times, I saw him play probably 500 times in person. The number of times you could say that he didn't have it that night, maybe 20, 25.
Yeah.
Like his need to be great every night was impressive and very difficult. It's hard to be good every night in the NHL.
Yeah.
And I think that's what young players don't understand, is that there's no free spaces on the schedule. Every night's hard.
And I think Fiala just learned that in the playoffs. I don't know how much of the West you saw, because I'm sure you were working during it, but Kevin was exposed during this playoff series against Vancouver. I mean, they realized after his great game 1 that if they just talk to him and hit him and get in his skin and target him and treat him like the stars are treated on an everyday basis, that he gets unhinged and takes bad penalties and gets himself off the game. And that's going to be the next stage of development for Kevin Fiala, is to realize that if he wants to be one of the greats in the NHL, he's going to have to accept that he's going to be targeted every game like one of the greats in the NHL.
Right. And so Sidney Crosby gets that every single night. Gloves to the face, rabbit punches, cross checks, you name it, right? And you just got to, and a great testament to Crosby, who I think is, and I say this as the highest compliment, is the greatest grinder in the history of the NHL.
Mm-hmm.
He just grinds every single shift, right? Hunts down pucks, does everything right. And one of the great testaments to him is, as great as he is, every night just keeps coming back. Doesn't get frustrated. Doesn't, I mean, sometimes, but he's hard to put off his game, put it that way.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Mark
It is.
Mathot would disagree when Crosby chopped part of his finger off, but
Yeah, exactly. We saw that with Johnny Gaudreau here. I think Eric Stahl got him. It is interesting what you said about development, and I think it's a huge concern for a lot of these NHL teams. One of the people that Elon asked, it was about Adam Beckman, who led the WHL in scoring, and here the Wild finally seem to have a steal of a third-round pick, and he doesn't get to play in the playoffs, and now his junior season is going to be delayed till at least till December.
yeah.
I mean, these are big lost games. I mean, you want to see Adam Beckman and how he would handle a Memorial Cup run. You want to see him how he's going to play in a full final year in juniors.
Absolutely, and I think it's really hard, and I think that it's going to be it's going to require even more patience than usual, and people hate hearing that from me, Mike. I'm telling you. Mm-hmm. I told fans in Montreal when Jesperi Kotkaniemi made their team as an 18-year-old that it was probably a mistake, because more often than not, it is a mistake to put an 18-year-old in your lineup. It's really hard to preach patience, but remember, these are 18-year-olds. NFL teams, and for the most part, NBA teams, draft college seniors, right? Or
Yep.
players in their 20s. Imagine a teenager playing in the NFL.
Yeah.
It never happens. How many teenagers play in the NBA? LeBron did, Kobe did. Other than that, not many, right? How many teenagers play Major League Baseball, right? Like, you're asking a lot to put a teenager into the NHL. So being patient with development, drafting well is part of it, but developing well is a big part of it too. And teams that rush their prospects inevitably pay a price for it. And
Yep.
so it's really hard to say to fans, when your team hasn't achieved the level that you want it to over the years, hey, be patient for a couple of years. But that's what it takes.
Yeah. Lastly, Gord, let me just ask you. I ask this to a lot of people that have jobs that I interview that a lot of young people would love and aspire to be. Is what would be your biggest advice to a young aspiring broadcaster? Because a lot of kids today, they think they're going to wake up and suddenly be able to call NHL games on NBC or TSN, but it takes a lot of hard work to get to where you want to get to.
Just do it. Broadcast it. If you're at home, turn the sound down and call the game. And find your voice. Find your own voice. The great thing about it is you get to be yourself because everyone else is taken. So don't try to sound like anyone else. Don't try to be like anyone else. Be you. Find your voice and get as many reps as you can. Go to a local rink. Get the roster and call a game. Just even in your head. Go sit in the corner where no one's around and call a game. That's what I would say. Just get reps is the way to do it.
And what's next for you now? Will you be part of the draft coverage and all that stuff? Or
I don't know what's next, to be honest. I'm sitting tight waiting. I'll probably do some radio for TSN. The next thing I do might be the World Junior Championship for TSN. Who knows?
Yeah, wow.
We're all waiting to see how this is all going to shake out. So, in the meantime, I'm grateful that I have not one but two employers, and I'm very lucky for that. And I'm healthy and safe, and so is my family. So that's the most important thing.
Well, hey, Gord, really do appreciate you coming on the Russo Hockey Show. I think one of the biggest treats for a lot of us in the States was the fact that NBC brought you, and now some of us that are lucky enough to travel to Canada to hear you call games every now and then on TSN. I get to hear you all the time here on NBC. And again, to follow Gord Miller on Twitter, GMillerTSN is where you can follow him. Gord, thanks so much.
My pleasure, Mike. Good talking to you.
Yep, stay safe the rest of the offseason.
You too.
You choose your home and car for a reason. They were the right fit for you. So why not make sure your insurance is the right fit too? Here's the deal. At State Farm, you can combine home and auto and save an average of $889. That's right. To combine and save, call State Farm agent Tony Hoagland. He's at 763-421-4900. Or check out the website at champlaininsurance.com.
Thanks again to Gord Miller, just one of the people that I highly, highly respect in the game. It's really a treat anytime I get to listen to him on NBC and TSN. I know I thought it was fascinating just listening to Gord talk about taking goalies in the draft, the development process, how hard it is to get centers. I think there's a lot of things that Wild fans will enjoy from this podcast. As I mentioned on Twitter, I also wanted to, for this episode or all these episodes that I interview a guest, I also still want to answer a lot of your Twitter questions. I got about 80 questions here, so I picked about 20 or 30 of them. I'm going to try to roll through them really quick here. Mike Veit, or Veit, V-E-I-T, who I believe sent me an email today that I did read and I will respond to at some point. He wants to know goalie options you think are an actual possibility. Also, you indicated that maybe this year isn't the year we could fill the top line center role with possibly better options a year out. So if that is the case, what adjustments would you make this year? I think that's two really good questions. I just did a big story that might be up by the time this podcast is out on the Athletic and goalie options. And I do think that it's, the one thing that I found fascinating that I took from the Gord Miller conversation is something that I think a lot of fans should start to really pay attention to. And that's anytime you get yourself a true star goalie and you eventually have to pay that goalie $9 million like the Florida Panthers did to go acquire Sergei Bobrovsky, you sit there and you now are putting yourself in a position that when his game falls apart, it's going to be impossible to move that contract. So I almost think that it's better to go get, kind of buy time for Kakkonen by going and trying to sign a stopgap. Now, maybe you could trade for a Matt Murray or a Tristan Jarry or a Korpisalo or somebody like that. But if you can't get that, I think it actually wouldn't be a bad thing to try to go sign a stopgap like a Hudobin or a Braden Holtby for a year or two to try to buy some time. But the one thing that I just don't know is how you find out if Kakkonen is the guy unless you actually give him a chance. But the one thing is you'll see in the story that I wrote today is I don't think Kakkonen could be the guy and play 55 or 60 games next year. A lot of scouts that I talk to say that you need to slowly bring a goalie on. And if that's the case, you can't really come back with a Stalock Kakkonen tandem next year. You might actually have to go get yourself a stopgap or return with Dubnyk. So we'll see there. In terms of centers, the one thing I think the Wild should at least look at is trying to look into the Calgary situation with Sean Monahan or some of these other teams that might have been disappointed in the first round that you might be able to get one of their top centers. If you can't go that route, I think that Eric Holla would be somebody that you could at least, if he's healthy, and you could get him on a quality deal in the $3 to $4 million range, I think that he would be somebody that could buy some time for maybe then you try to hit your home run if suddenly a Barkov is available in a year or so. Next question from Finn Realist. Are the Wild likely to forego buying out players like Dubnyk or Rask to avoid the future cap hits? Seems like Leopold might not like that idea as revenue is down. Yeah, that's probably true, but no GM wants to say to his owner, hey, we're going to go give free money to somebody else or somebody to not play or to go play somewhere else. I think that's Bill Guerin, a direct quote. So that makes sense. But the reality is that if you can't trade Dubnyk or Rask and you need to create more of that position rather than cap space, you might have to go the route. And I think the easiest and simplest thing to do with Dubnyk would probably be to buy him out. Rask, as you mentioned, it might not be worth it, especially with centers down in this league and it's hard to get them. Having Rask as your 13th forward and somebody you can throw in there every now and then is not the worst thing in the world either if you don't want to waste the money and buy him out. But Dubnyk, I think, is probably the leading contender if the Wild are going to go and pull the trigger on the buyout option. Dylan Lukes asked about Sean Monahan. I just brought him up coincidentally. Bill asks, give me your Seattle expansion draft expectations. Do you see many side deals or teams just resigned to lose a decent player? I think what we're seeing with Alex Tuch right now and what we've seen with a ton of players on the Vegas Golden Knights, I think a lot of GMs that are smart people are kicking themselves for the way that they were essentially manipulated by George McPhee and the Vegas Golden Knights and the masterful job that they did to build that organization. Getting guys like Shea Theodore and Riley Smith and Jonathan Marchessault and William Karlsson and tons and tons of players, not just Alex Tuch. I mean, Chuck Fletcher is a Ivy League intelligent, Ivy League educated, very intelligent human being. And I think if you ask him in hindsight what he should have done, he probably should have just said, take the player. So I think this is going to be, as I was talking with Gord Miller, a lot harder job for Ron Francis and for old Chuck there in Seattle to try to manipulate a lot of teams. And if you're Billy Guerin, it's sort of the same situation here. First of all, do you go 7 forwards or 3 defensemen, or you just protect 8 skaters? But at the end of the day, why make a deal with Seattle if you're going to lose a big player anyway and potentially give yourself up a prospect? You know as well as I do that Bill Guerin, who's not the GM that made the decision, would give anything to have Alex Tuck on his roster right now. So I think that if you go back and ask Chuck Fletcher, like, did you goof there? I think he would probably say, yeah, we did. Let's see. Ton Squad 42 asks, why is Adam Beckman not considered an elite prospect? He's leading the WHL in scoring, not good these days. Proman basically said the Wild's pipeline is average to below average. Look, all I could tell you from Adam Beckman is watching him on video, he seems like a heck of a player. I've never seen him live. He is a third-round pick that seemed to come out of nowhere. Obviously, somebody on the Wild staff really, really liked him because Paul Fenton traded a third-round pick in this year's draft for the third-round pick in last year's draft to go get Adam Beckman. And then what does he wind up doing? He winds up leading the entire league in goal scoring and points. So, I can't speak for Corey Proman. Maybe Corey hasn't seen him enough. I really think that they might have hit on something here, and we'll have to see where you're going. But in terms of the Wild, and their prospect pool, I think when you look at a lot of teams, the one thing that the Wild seem to always lack that a lot of teams have is that young kid that could step in the lineup and be a difference maker right away. And the Wild never, ever seem to have that. And that's something that needs to happen. We're seeing it right now with Eriksson, Cunnin, and Greenway. None of them have stepped up to a point where it's like, wow, that guy is a home run draft pick. And so I think that's what probably Corey Proman wants to see is eventually when a Beckman or a Pronman or a Kaprizov get to the lineup, a Hovinoff, can they play right away? Amazing in your lineup.
I want to welcome back Twill as a sponsor of the program. TwillMN.com is the website. They have beautiful photos of all the different kinds of clothing and accessories they can provide. Also, you can find them on Instagram at Twill Edina. I always tell you about the Stenstrom shirts that I wear all the time. They get imported from Sweden, and they are the best dress shirts I've ever worn. The best jacket I've ever worn, I got at Twill, and they tailored it for me. The most comfortable, like, casual pants and dress pants I've ever bought, I bought there. They have everything from belts, stuff you can wear on the golf course. Check it all out at TwillMN.com. And if you want to talk about curbside pickup or contactless home delivery, or you just want to check in on what's going on at the show, you want to do phone or video consultations, just email Scott at TwillMN.com. That is the owner, Scott Dayton. Great guy, big sports fan, great supporter of this network. Scott at TwillMN.com.
Alec asks, which player has been the biggest surprise in the playoffs? That's a great question. I wish I thought about this before I read it out loud. Which player has been the biggest surprise the one that just jumps in my head is Quinn Hughes. Now, I know that sounds stupid because he could potentially be a runner-up for the Calder Trophy this year, but to be an 18-year-old or a teenager, 20, I think just turned 20, in the playoffs and be a difference maker every time he has the puck on his stick, be absolutely electric every time he has the puck on his stick, skate into the offensive zone with this level of confidence in a postseason game and hold that puck, which is not easy to do, draw people to you and create plays for your opponent at a young age the way that Quinn Hughes is, and the fact that he is doing this, I think he is the biggest surprise I've seen. I said to somebody the other day, I wish I could have my Calder Trophy ballot back because I probably would change it. The kid is unbelievable. And so he's probably the biggest surprise, and yet I know that's some people might scoff at that since he's, again, a Calder Trophy nominee. Zach Spicer asks, I'm sure that's been answered elsewhere, but what's with the rarity of high numbers in franchise history? Outside of Pierre-Marc Bouchard, who is 96, Kyle Granlund, who is 64, and now Kaprizov, which is 97, most numbers have been below 50. That's actually a Tony DeCosta role, their equipment manager. He has always been somebody that has loathed the high numbers and has to be somebody that the GM essentially gives permission to give him a high number. And that's been a Tony rule for the very beginning. And for an organization that has never retired a number, there's certainly a lot of numbers in the lower part of the numeral scale here. Meanwhile, affiliates and prospects ask, would a 1 or 2 year deal with a veteran goalie like Hudobin or Halak make sense to buy time for Kakkonen or Jones? If they could get them on a reasonable deal, you could still upgrade the position without a long-term commitment. I think that philosophy is absolutely what I would do. Now, the one thing I'll say is that, like, Robin Leonard, Jacob Markstrom, Hudobin, when you're an unrestricted free agent, you're going to want stability and long-term deal and money. So like a guy like Khudobin is not just going to come here on a 1-year deal, a 2-year deal. Same thing with Leonard. As I mentioned to Gord, he's coming off 3 straight 1-year contracts. You know that he is going to want a long-term commitment by somebody this offseason. I think Carolina is the one team that potentially could give it to him. But I think that what you're saying, is the right way. If the Wild think that they want to buy time for Kakkonen, I think the smart play would be to go sign somebody to a type of contract, to a 1 or 2 year deal. Look at what Cam Talbot just did. Cam Talbot signed for 1 year. He was trying to reestablish his career. 1 year with Calgary at I think a little above $2 million, and he had a heck of a season there. He didn't have a great end of the playoffs, but he had a heck of a season, regular season, and now all of a sudden somebody's going to probably pay him this offseason. So it makes sense. Let's see, some more questions. Kelly asks, what's the status of Koivu? Nothing new there that I know of. Again, I think the big thing with Mikko is he wants to see when next NHL season starts and what his offseason is going to look like. And until we know that, I don't think that Mikko's in any hurry to make a decision, but it's a good question. I think that Mikko and Bill Guerin will talk this week. Kyle Marlowe asks, I'll get ripped for this, but could the Wild make a play for Braden Point? Tampa Bay is up against the cap, currently have a lot of players on NC. I'm not sure exactly what that means. And a few restricted free agents I'm sure they would like to keep. I think it's worth a phone call at least. No doubt it's worth a phone call. And the one thing I know about Julian Breezebois and Bill Guerin, because they've said it out loud publicly on a Zoom, is that they've talked before about trades. And I got the impression from listening to Julian Breezebois that they were the team that was interested in Mikko Koivu at the trade deadline. I think earlier this year they were interested in Joel Eriksson-Ek. I know the Wild have had interest in Cirelli. So obviously Bill Guerin and Julian Breezebois have talked, and if you're talking about players like Cirelli, you can only be laughed at, right? So you might as well ask about Braden Point. I don't think that they're trading Braden Point, though. Chris asks, any chance Wild trade for Monahan, Nylander, Reinhart, Domi? I did a center story last week that I highly recommend. That was before Calgary bowed out as quickly as they did, though. That was one where they were up in the series, and I thought they were going to win the series, so I didn't have Monahan mentioned. And the one name that I think I probably should have put in there was Sam Reinhart with the Buffalo Sabres. But Nylander is an interesting person if you think he can play center. And Max Domi is somebody I don't know if I love. I know Bergevin, who is close with Bill Guerin, was not exactly thrilled with his playoff. And, I think he could be had. It would probably cost you a defenseman. It's just whether or not you want to waste that chip on Domi or if you want to hold on to it for some other player. Dr. Obridge or Trowbridge jokingly asks, when do you expect to see Elo in a Minnesota Wild uniform? That's a joke from one of the drafts like 7 or 8 years ago when the Wild drafted Elo in like the 5th or 6th rounds, and I Googled him, and the only evidence that he even existed was he was a hotel in Finland. He was not a player, but turns out he was a player, just not a very good one. Family dining, great question. Do you expect that Bruce Boudreau will be back with the Capitals organization? I personally don't. I think that he would be very interested in going back there. He's actually moving to Hershey, Pennsylvania here in about a week. And I was supposed to have actually lunch with him today, and I would have loved to ask him that question, but I wound up not having lunch with him, so we'll see. My gut says that they're going to go for somebody that wasn't been there, done that. Bruce was there when they had a very young Nicholas Backstrom, a very young Alex Ovechkin when he was scoring 50-something goals a year, but would be minus like 1,000. And I think that we've seen a much more dedicated and committed and disciplined Alex Ovechkin that suddenly realized in his career that you can score all the goals you want, but if you don't commit to the defensive side of the puck, you're not going to win cups. And then what happens is he committed and he became an all-around player, and then he got the satisfaction of winning that cup a couple years ago with the Washington Capitals. But even though Bruce had a young Alex Ovechkin, I think that Brian McClellan, who's the assistant GM at the time with George McPhee, will probably look at Bruce as kind of been there, done that. I think it would be a hoot to see him back there. I think he should absolutely be one of these guys that gets a call from one of these teams that are going to have an opening, whether it's Seattle or the Calgary Flames if they have a job opening, or he could be first out of the bullpen next season when all of a sudden a team comes calling. And that's why if I was him, I personally would not go to the Toronto Maple Leafs as an assistant. They have called to ask permission, but that happened, the way I understand it, a couple months ago. They have not had a conversation with Bruce. I know that his heartstrings might be tugged toward Toronto because he's from there, played there. His mom lives there still. He'd be back where, essentially where he was, and then he could eventually retire and, do Sportsnet or TSN for the rest of his life. But if I was him, because I think he'd be forced out of the bullpen next year, to me, I wouldn't take that job right off the hop unless you just feel like it's something that you want to do by going back home. But I would wait and be more patient. Derek asks, how likely are the Wild to take a chance on a potential first-line center, but maybe isn't there yet? You had mentioned that maybe they need to try and get the second overall pick from the LA Kings, but what about one of LA's center prospects? The interesting thing is that they have a lot of center prospects in LA, but I don't think anyone's an absolute stud. So that's why I think that they're going to take Byfield. But they've also long been looking for a left defenseman to play with Drew Doughty. And that's why, at least if I was Bill Guerin, I would call Rob Blake and say, hey, is there a deal that could be made here for the number 2 overall pick? And if that's the case, could Brodin be a starting point? We'll see. I don't know if that could get it done. Nick Wages asks, with the crowd at left wing on the existing roster and prospects, the upcoming expansion draft and Greenway's lack of performance, wouldn't it make sense to try to trade him now, acquire draft choices or prospects that don't have to be protected? I think it does make sense. The one thing I've always said, and a GM years ago, I think it was Neil Smith that once told me, that the most important thing for a GM is to realize that a player is not going to be the player that you envision him being until everybody else in the league realizes the same thing. And I do think that there's a risk, obviously, when you trade a talent like Jordan Greenway, and all of a sudden, what if he becomes that great player in another organization? But the other thing is if you don't think that their drive or the commitment is there to be that great player, maybe you have to cut the cord quickly and use him while his trade value is at its absolute peak. And that could be the case this summer with the Greenway, especially if they can't trade Zach Parise, because I still think that there's a little bit of a logjam at wing. And, I could see if Parise isn't the guy traded this summer, that somebody is going to have to move. And could it be Greenway? The one thing that we've learned on when I had Bill Guerin on the on Straight from the Source with Michael Russo on The Athletic a couple of weeks ago is that he is not happy with the way that Greenway played this year, and made sure to let him have it, that he needs to commit himself to being a better player this offseason. Let me kind of go through a couple more of these questions here. MJ, who's one of my favorite people on Twitter, Mary, I believe her name is, asked the story and reasons for your move to Florida to Minnesota. I actually talked about that the other day on a podcast in Vancouver, actually a Wild podcast, but the person that did it was based in Richfield and Vancouver Island. What other hockey locations were in the mix at the time, and in what ways are your colleagues Helene Elliott, Lisa Dillman, Katie Strang leading the way for the next wave of journalists? A lot to unpack there. I mean, the big reason why I moved from Florida to Minnesota was to cover the Wild for the Star Tribune. I talked about that on the State of Hockey podcast the other day, so I highly recommend people listen to that, so I won't waste your time. But there really was no other locations in the mix. I, over the years, had interviewed for a lot of jobs in other markets and never wound up took it. I wound up always staying in South Florida. And then during the lockout at the end, I had a decision to make if I wanted to stay there and cover something besides the Florida Panthers or go head first for this job here at the Star Tribune. And I went for the job and got the job, lucky enough. And it brought me to Minnesota. And amazingly, this is going to be my 16th season coming up next year. And in what ways are Helene Elliott, Lisa Dillman, and Katie Strang leading the way for the next wave of journalists? It's hard for me to answer because I don't even look at them as somebody that is like leading the way for the next wave, because they've long been leading the way. Like, this isn't just something new. I mean, Helene Elliott is a Hall of Famer. Lisa Dillman, who is from here in Minnesota, has been a hockey writer forever and one of the people that I respect the absolute most. And Katie Strang is just by far our MVP at The Athletic. She's not only a great writer, but one of the most cutthroat investigative journalists I've ever seen in my life. And she is a hockey fan true and true. Like, I don't know a lot of people realize that she actually started at Newsday covering the New York Islanders years and years ago. So these have been long friends of mine, long colleagues, and they're just, to me, people that everybody whatever your gender is, should absolutely respect, because they are just absolutely incredible. And by the way, my mom's doing great, Mary, so thanks for asking. Let me see here. Lap asks, I think, trying to give me a heart attack. You think if it's possible to talk to the Rangers about taking Hank for a year to get him in a sweater here. I talked about this in depth on last week's podcast, but I think the big thing with Lundqvist is that he makes $8.5 million. To get him, you're probably buying out Dubnyk, so that's going to cost you about $2.7 million this upcoming year in a cap hit. The most that the Rangers could take in retained cap hit is $4.25 million, which is half the $8.5. So now to have 1 year of Hank, you're basically spending a cap hit $7 million between the Dubnyk buyout and the Lundqvist thing for a 1 year Henrik Lundqvist presence in your lineup. It just doesn't, to me, there's cheaper, better alternatives than going that route. And plus Hank's got a no move clause. So as cool as it would be for all of us to see Henrik Lundqvist and cover a future Hall of Famer, I just don't see it happening. Let's see. Mark Chapin asked, why are goaltenders not prioritized and valued in the first round of the draft? Is there data that supports that? I think that it's gargantuan, actually, the misses in the first round, and even more so the amount of people that you can get in the later rounds, because it's such a unpredictable position to project, that I think that's the biggest reason, Mark. But there is data to do that, and maybe I'll do a story on that. I believe, actually, Zone Coverage, Tony Abbott, who sometimes freelances for The Athletic, did something recently on that. I'd never actually read the story, but he did something that I highly recommend you reading, because he's always good in his analytical talks. But if you heard the beginning of this podcast, Gord Miller talked and I talked a little bit about that. Brian Steele asks a bubble question. No pay for players in the playoffs. Do they still get per diem in the bubble? What is it in the NHL? Yes, players get $112 a day in the bubble on game days. But basically there is playoff bonuses, and that player fund is actually double than what it used to be. So Thomas Drance, who writes for The Athletic, actually tweeted the other day that by advancing, the Canucks players guaranteed themselves an additional, I believe it was $600,000 from the playoff player fund, which comes to roughly, I think it was, 600,000 divided by 23. It's probably about $25,000 extra a player and less for the Black Aces. Now, if you keep on going further and further, that will go up. Now, at least the way it used to be is that the captains actually could decide whether it's an even split amongst players or if certain players deserve more from the player fund. And so basically, eventually, they're going to be told, here's your portion of the player fund, and then it's divvied up. So these players, even though they're not getting their salaries, they are getting a bonus by playing. A couple more questions, because my mouth is getting tired here, my voice. Scott Bender asks, remind me how, again, we let Alex Tuch go. He sure would look good in a Wild uniform. Basically, again, Jonas Brodin was protected. Matt Dumba, Marco Scandella, Eric Stahl were not, if I remember correctly. So to get the Vegas Golden Knights to draft Eric Haula, basically the trade was, here's Alex Tuch, you take Haula and don't take the extra defenseman, is essentially what it was. Let's see. Ben Craig asks, I know Brodin and Dumba get talked about the most. Do you think the trading Brodin creates more of a hole, considering his gaps retrieval skating abilities are so elite? Yeah, I do, although it's very, very hard, as the Wild have learned by trading Brent Burns, to find a sharp-shooting right-shot defenseman. The one thing about trading Dumba is that you better make sure that Brodin's re-signed before that, because Brodin and Dumba are extremely close. The worst thing in the world could be, you imagine they trade Matt Dumba, and then they go, hey, Jonas, here's your extension. He's like, nah, I'll test free agency. So to me, if all of a sudden here in the next 2 months, we see a Jonas Brodin extension coming, I think that means that we know that Matt Dumba could be going somewhere else. Let's see. I've answered the questions about Adam Beckman. Bakes asks, he asks a lot about expansion draft. Let me do that more when I'm actually looking at a bunch of names. He does ask, does Matt Zuccarello's no movement clause, are we required to lock him up? Essentially, Bill Guerin can go to him, hey, will you waive your no move clause to allow us to protect another player? And this way, technically, Seattle would be allowed to draft him. But if Bill Guerin could say to Matt, hey, I know for a fact that Seattle's not going to take you, with 3 years left on your contract at $6 million per, maybe that would be something Zuccarello would do, would be to allow the Wild to essentially take another, protect another player by allowing him to be exposed. Eric Marvel asked about Alan Walsh. I talked a little bit about that with Gordon Miller. Kellen Johnson asked, what's the status of the Wild's analytic department getting back to full strength? I actually believe I asked that question to Bill Guerin on my Athletic podcast a couple of weeks ago toward the end, and he said that right now he is just planning on having Matt Sells run the department. Now, I know Matt Sells was interviewing people this year, but the way that Bill answered that question is that right now that Matt Sells is a one-man department. Ryan asked, why did Kaprizov bring his equipment here if all he did was quarantine? It's a great question because as far as I know, he did not skate at all. So maybe it was literally to deliver it. One less thing to bring here. Give it to Tony DaCosta maybe and have Tony know what type of equipment he uses and have it here waiting for when it eventually comes back. But as far as I know, he did not skate at all. Bryce Vaughn asks, how would Holtby signing work? Dubnyk and Rask being bought out would create room to wiggle for him, a 2-3-year contract while Kalkinen develops. I think I just mentioned that, but if I was Holtby, I would actually look at a 1-year deal somewhere, similar to what Cam Talbot did. And maybe, Minnesota does make sense. I think I kind of poo-pooed it last week on last week's show, but the more I think about it, again, if you think that you don't want to stay lock Kalkinen tandem, because you need a goalie that's going to play 50 games, maybe Holtby would be intrigued by coming here and knowing that he could, on a 1-year deal, get the majority of starts and kind of mold a young player. Dan DeMoore asked, why did you steal Judd Brackett from us? It's a funny question. Maybe it's the 3 straight Calder Trophy nominees that Judd Brackett's drafted between Elias Pettersson, Brock Besser, and Quinn Hughes. That could be why. So there you go. John Steinhagen, why did the Wild give up on Darcy Kemper? I mean, at the time, remember, it was the last year of his deal. They'd give him a lot of opportunities. He always seemed to flounder. It always seemed to be the same MO, good, and then all of a sudden a bad goal happens in third period, and then a flood of them happen. Kind of what we saw in this last playoff round, actually. But it just shows you again, and this is a good way to end the show, it just shows you again that it is a late developing position. Darcy Kemper was in this organization a long time. They gave him a lot of opportunities to start. He gave them a lot of good games, but every time it seemed like they needed him to come through, it didn't come through. He didn't come through, and they had to go get guys like Devin Dubnyk or Ilya Bryzgalov. He just couldn't get it done at a young age, which is why they've got to be careful with Kakkonen. You can't just put him in the lineup next year and say start 60 games. So you got to slowly develop them, and then hopefully Kakkonen can be who they want to be. But we're seeing with Darcy Kemper now, he's absolutely developed into a pretty good goalie. So I hope you liked the first edition of sort of the new Russo Hockey Show. Again, you're going to see changes that I think that you're going to like. Once a month or so, I'm going to interview somebody like I did with Gord Miller today. I appreciate Gord coming on. Other times we'll have Jim Souhan. Other times we'll have Anthony LaPanta joining me a lot. And so I really hope you enjoyed it. Again, this episode was brought to you by Profile by Sanford, the Twill in the Galleria Mall, State Farm with Tony Hoagland, and Bosch Law. Thanks as always to Brandon Morton for putting in the hard work to put this show together. It's not easy being Brandon, that's for sure. So talk to you next week. This is Michael Russo, and this was the Russo Hockey Show.
Pretty little city built on a hillside. Music in the bars and fire in the sky. We went to the beach and it was covered in ice. And I used to call it home. So much coming out, there's nothing going in. I know that you feel like you're never gonna win. Oh, but the world won't forgive a winner.